I think the broader impact for Project Exploration, first and foremost, is on kids' lives. The 250 minority youth and girls in our intensive youth programs whose lives literally are changed because they've had an intensive experience, a very personalized experience with science, with scientists, that helps them change their perspective on what's possible in their lives. That's definitely the first and probably greatest impact that Project Exploration is having. My hope, my dream, is that by creating a track record that demonstrates that kids that maybe you thought couldn't really do science, not only can do science, but can contribute to science. My hope is that the impact we have on teachers who change their teaching practice, that those kinds of track records create a ripple effect in the scientific and education community that changes the way they think about who science really ought to be for and how it can happen. I think really, though, one of the most critical moments came for Project Exploration after an announcement of a brand new African dinosaur, Carcharodontosaurus. In 1995, we were working in Morocco and we unearthed a dinosaur that's really Africa's answer to T-Rex. It's a large predatory dinosaur. It was dominating the continent. It had a very small brain. Which just goes to show you don't need a very large brain to dominate a continent. But we were talking about this dinosaur over and over and over again in the press, and Paul went on the Today Show, and after the Today Show, we were kind of bleary-eyed at a restaurant, a diner, and we were saying, God, you know, there's so much interest in this discovery. Whose job is it to make sure that it's actually regular people can meet a scientist or touch a fossil? And we were really kind of chewing on this question, like, well, who's doing that? And we said, wouldn't it be great if there was a place where, you know, kids like the kids I was teaching at the time on the south side of Chicago, if there were a place that like kids like mine could just go meet a scientist and they didn't have to come from a wealthy family or get a special behind the scenes tour. And we sketched out on a little piece of paper this idea of a place where people could come to get immersed in the world of science and scientists, and it would be very personal. It would be like, here's a question you're asking that you're curious about, and here's how the science works. We sketched it all out, and that was really the idea for Project Exploration. Project Exploration targets primarily minority youth and girls in the Chicago public school system. We are doing some work with teachers, but we actually reach about 1 million people a year through traveling exhibits that get placed often in non-traditional venues like libraries or conservatories. So even though we really focus very intensively on a small group, relatively small group of Chicago public school students, we serve about 200 Chicago public school students each year. We reach about 3,000 in our region through school services, and then about 1 million nationally and internationally. We don't just get kids interested in science. Our model says it's not enough to get kids interested in science. We must also figure out how to keep them interested in science and also equip them with what they need to develop a vision for themselves as science as possible. So junior paleontologists, Sisters for Science, our service learning program, those are all ways to get kids interested in science, but it's that chance to meet Jane Goodall, that chance to get into a chemistry lab and actually look at their own DNA. Those are the things that keep them interested. And then things like college prep, mentoring, ongoing relationship building, that's the stuff that'll equip them to get through high school and hopefully into college. A lot of the heart and soul of the way Project Exploration designs its programs, some of our core beliefs that people learn by doing things, that relationships are kind of at the heart of education, that personalization is key, is key. Those are not our ideas. You know, those are ideas in the history of education that come from folks like John Dewey or critical educators like Michael Apple that talk about kind of the political aspect of schooling. So in a lot of ways, there is a basis for us to turn to for reference points. What does that mean to put students at the center? What does that look like? Why is that important for a student to learn well or become empowered or whatever your take is? So in a lot of ways, the pedagogy, there's a lot of reassuring things out there because people have written about the pedagogical basis. But there are very few models for us to turn to of a group that is really using the best practices of youth development, education, and also science, because so much of science targets students purely at an academic level, and students who already can read, they can already write, they know their times tables, they know what a graph is and how to read it. Our students don't necessarily know any of those things when they come to us. So, there's a lot of figuring out that we have to do. But first and foremost, I think we turn to people that are smarter than us. They might be smarter than us as a principal in a high school, or someone that's working with kids in the juvenile justice system, or people that are dealing with dating relationships. It kind of depends on the issue at the time. But I think one of the smartest things that we do is remind ourselves all the time that there are people out there that know their worlds really well, and that we need to tap into them and their experiences. I think the big idea for us is that the status quo of science is an outdated, outmoded form. Science ought to be for everyone. It ought to be easy to meet a scientist, to understand why the questions they're asking are important to them, and ultimately, science is transformative. It changes people's lives. To understand that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and that humans have been here for about 5 million years, give or take, of that 4.5 billion, really makes you take seriously that we are right now changing the physical dynamics of the Earth through things like global warming or pollution. Those are very big ideas. And in smaller ideas, it makes you think about your life and how you interact with the planet and the questions you ask, I think, very differently. So I really believe that understanding how science works, thinking scientifically, thinking about, well, what's your evidence for that? What's that based on? Why is that even a good question? I think those things are transformative.